So I've been doing this series about the reasons I'm still a Christian, which seems particularly relevant at a time when lots of people are abandoning the faith and exiting from churches. And a lot of that is happening because people are disillusioned with what we might just call kind of the Christian movement in America. Whether that's because of Christians in politics, because of Christians in judgmentalism, because of Christians in equality issues regarding women and race, or the refusal of so many pastors and church leaders just to have conversations, to think and have conversations about any of the many important questions that seem to be arising fresh among people of faith these days. There's lots of questions that are coming, people saying, have we been thinking right about this? And a lot of pastors are kind of like, we have the Bible, it's already figured out, we're not talking about it. So for all these different reasons, people are saying, I just don't know if I want to be a part of this anymore, do the Christian thing anymore. So I've been unpacking some of the reasons why I am still on a specifically Christian journey. And this morning's message started out as a message on hope. I said, well, I want to talk about that, I'm still a Christian because of the hopes that I have as part of this whole thing. And so I was working on my sermon this week and listing out all these various hopes that I have inside me because of my faith in Jesus, my journey with Jesus. And where I was going with the sermon started to feel a little bit like I was going to be saying to people like, come on, we have all these hopes because of this Christian thing. You don't want to give up on all those hopes. You don't want to lose all that. Maybe like I was trying to convince somebody to stay in, or maybe trying to pump some air into the tires of someone's faith. And what I realized as this is what happens when you have to preach, is you get halfway through a sermon, if you've ever done this kind of thing, and then you go, yeah, that's pretty much not it. So, and which is good, because that's usually where the Lord kind of shows up and says, yeah, let's go over this way, The Lord kind of comes in my mind and says, walk over here with me, Fran. And what I started to realize is that I'm not a Christian merely because I have these hopes. The hope of joy, the hope of restoration, the hope of eternity, the hope of reunions on the other side. I'm a Christian because there is something of substance that's been going on in my life for decades. And that something of substance is my experience of the reality and moving of God's Spirit in my life. When I was 15, I prayed what I call my first earnest prayer. Kneeling in the dark on a beach by a southern Wisconsin lake. And I wasn't sure if God was really real. And I wasn't sure if God was real, if he would want me. But I was empty, so I reached out into the dark and hoped that someone was there to answer. And when I did, I felt something. Hard to put into words, like a warmth enveloping me, like the presence of a great love being near me. And that was the first time I really felt the Spirit of God in some tangible way. Now, you can write that off as the emotional, psychological experience of a teenage boy who's deep in the throes of angst and depression. Of course you can. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real. It only means that it was a subjective experience. And we have lots of subjective experiences that actually are real and are really tied to real things. When I look back on that experience, in some ways, even I find it surprising that it quite literally changed the trajectory of my life. It began what has now been a rather long journey of living life while trying to be aware of God's presence with me and in me. And this has in turn, that journey of being aware of God and trying to live life that way, that in turn has caused other things to unfold that has led to this large reservoir of hopes that are now inside me. But, and I suppose this is my confession this morning in this sermon, after these many years of living this faith life, I realize now that I personally, I can't really live without hope. I've joked across the years that if life doesn't really mean something, then we're just squirrels gathering nuts on a random rock hurtling through space. And I can't really live with that. Or as Shakespeare's character Macbeth laments upon losing his power and the love of his life, He says, "And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing." And if Macbeth is right, I'm just telling you this morning, I can't really live with that. So if I'm honest, I have to admit to you that I can't really live with the idea that life is ultimately meaningless and that all the things we fill it with are just our attempts to give meaning to something which in the end actually has none. I can't live without hope. And in truth, I think that almost everyone feels that deep need, even if only subconsciously, for hope. This is why even if we give up God and we give up on faith and on Christianity or just making any real sense of life, we still go on as human beings trying to create meaning in our lives through relationships, experiences, pleasures, achievements, all these things, because those experiences reassure us every day that life means something, right? That there's a reason to get out of bed tomorrow morning. So even if we move away from all our lofty ideas and ideologies and hopes, we very rarely give up on the idea of meaning because we're bent on it. If at some point we can't find any meaning in life, that's when we find ourselves in despair. And I don't see this as some weakness or deficiency in human beings, that we're so desperate for meaning and that without it we despair. Rather, I take it as a clue that we are living outside the garden and we know it. Somewhere deep inside, we know it. Somewhere deep inside, we know intrinsically that we were made for a life that we aren't fully taking hold of or that we have somehow become separated from. Which reminds me of a bit of C.S. Lewis I have long loved. Lewis in one place writes, "At present we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door." I love this. "But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in." And that brings me to the hopes that are specifically those which have come to me because of my encounter with Christ and my journey with Christ. I say my encounter with Christ, but really I should say my encounters, plural, with Christ. Because I have tangibly encountered the Spirit of Christ many, many times in my life. I don't know if you've had that experience. If not, I hope in some way, unique to every one of us, as unique as your fingerprints, but in some way that you will encounter the Spirit of Christ. I encountered it, as I said, as that 15-year-old boy kneeling in the dark by a lake. When Linda and I were dating or engaged, I encountered it one night. I was praying in my little apartment and just I was new to the journey and hungry for God and seeking God. And I had an experience of just being immersed in the Holy Spirit. Some people might say baptized in the Holy Spirit. And I was literally lost in the presence of God for a couple hours, in the presence of love. And I hadn't been around Christians enough. This is awful that I have to say it this way. I hadn't been around Christians enough to have a tainted picture of God yet. And everybody went, ooh. So I just experienced God's presence that night as pure love coming to me. And I've both seen and experienced physical healings. I've felt a sustaining strength of God at times that I felt, sometimes that I felt like I had no strength left. And I have been led by God in uncanny ways, including to start this church at the tender age of 32, to start New Life for Haiti, to wander the streets of East Joliet, which gave birth to the ministry that you heard Dave talking about up here this morning and that Sue Hoffman leads for us, our friendship with Pastor Manuel and Arlene Baez over on the east side. Let me tell you one very specific story of the Holy Spirit's leading. And I have a few of these, and they're weird, okay? So just, if you never heard a story like this before, just be prepared. They're weird. But I have a few of these, but I just want to tell you one, because when I tell you this story, you'll understand why I would say that having had experiences, tangible experiences of the Holy Spirit like this, it would be very hard for me to walk away from this journey with Christ. So this happened when I was just 20 years old, probably about 8 months before Linda and I got married. And I don't know if you know this, but your pastor spent 25, 30 years behind a barber chair cutting hair. And so this was when I was going to school to learn to cut hair. I know that's weird too, but that's where I learned everything about ministry, was cutting people's hair. It's true. It was like being a bartender, you know. I had my own little shop, just me and my client. I knew whose marriage was falling apart, whose kid was in rehab, who just lost their job, you know. And that's what I was doing for a living when we started this church. Because we came to Plainfield with like $200 and said, let's start a church. So I worked. So I was going to hair school, which was on the north side of Aurora, and school was all day long every day, like Monday through Friday. So I went out to get something to eat, and I picked up some food. I went to a place and ate, and I was on my way back to the school. And as I was coming back to the school, I drove by another little, kind of a burger, beef kind of place, a little fast foody kind of restaurant. And something inside me said, you need to go in there, which I thought was absolutely stupid because I'd just eaten. And so I kept driving, and about a half mile or a mile past this place, I could not shake this feeling that I had to go back and go into this place. And I thought, this is so, I'm some kind of idiot. And so I go back and I park my car, and I'm walking up to the door of this place, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I walk into this place, and it's crowded, it's lunchtime, and on the other side of the restaurant, probably about from here to the cafe, I see a young woman sitting at a table by herself, and I know that I have to walk over and talk to her. Well, that's awkward, right? Hi. I don't know why I'm here. It's true. And I walked over, and as I walked up to her table, I saw she was crying. And so I said hi to her, and I sat down in front of her, and I said, this is going to sound weird. But I said, I was driving by, and I felt like I was supposed to come in here, and I think I was supposed to come in here and talk to you. And her face is wet with tears, and I said, are you okay? And she said, no, I'm not okay today. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I've lived a really wild life. And she said, about a month ago, I became a Christian. And all my family and everybody she worked there, she worked in this little restaurant, and she said, and all my family and everybody I work with here just keep making fun of me and ridiculing me and saying this is the stupidest thing they've ever heard of, and why am I going and getting religion, and blah, 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 blah. And I looked at her and I said, well, I'm here to tell you that God that you gave your heart to just stopped me driving down Indian Trail Road and told me to come in here and tell you that you made the right choice, and that he's with you and he's never going to let you go. And her mouth just dropped open, and I prayed for her, and I walked out, and I got in my little, a Pontiac Sunbird, red, that she paid for. And I said, God, you are so weird. Right? That's weird. Now here's the truth, though, that even on a really good journey with Christ, we don't experience this kind of tangible presence and moving and hearing the voice of God kind of stuff every day. Even someone like the Apostle Paul, who experienced God so tangibly and powerfully, he wrote things like this: we walk by faith and not by sight. We're not going to see it every day. Or he said this: right now we see as in a darkened mirror, only then, meaning when we're with Christ, only then will we see face to face. And this makes the Christian journey this very interesting mixture of things. On the one hand, just like everyone else, we experience life as unpredictable and sometimes very difficult and confusing. But on the other hand, if we are open to it, if we look for it, we experience God walking with us. I just used that phrase, a mixture of things, but the early Christians, they didn't so much think of it as a mixture of things. They thought of it as, and they wrote about it this way, as living in two worlds simultaneously, two ages. The age that is passing away, John describes it that way in one of his letters, and the age that is coming into being, two different versions of creation, the old creation and the new creation, that the person on a journey with Jesus is straddling these two ages, these two epochs, these two versions of creation, living in this one, but belonging to and beginning to tangibly experience the one that is coming. And that's very much how I feel, very much my experience. And the core of it is this sense I've had all across these decades. This is the kind of the core nugget of it, that I'm not alone anymore. Now, I'm not going all Pentecostal Pollyanna on you here. I'm not saying that I've never had a moment that I haven't cried out and said, God, where are you? Because I have had many of those moments. But there has been this sense of the abiding presence of God. It's like Linda's presence in my life. I know when I wake up every morning, she's going to be next to me in that bed. If she's ever not, that's going to be a problem. And that's how I know. I know when I get up in the morning. The first thing I do is I say, good morning, Lord, because I know that God is present to my life, however life is going. And I would ask us this morning, this idea that God comes to us and just chooses to have his abiding presence with us, are we really surprised? Because this is actually exactly what Jesus said was going to happen. Exactly. Listen to this. John 14:19. In a little while the world won't see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you're going to live too. On that day, you will know that I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. He who has my commandments and keeps them, he is the one who loves me, and he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will come and manifest myself to him. And Judas, not Judas Iscariot, another Judas, Judas said to him, Lord, how is it that you're going to manifest yourself to us and not to the world? And Jesus said to him, if anyone loves me, he will walk in my way, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him, and we will make our home with him. Isn't that what I'm describing to you? Now, let's just be honest this morning that for people steeped in a time and place like we are that focuses on money and possessions and physical pleasures, none of which are bad, intrinsically bad in themselves, but they're all things that are out here, right? Everybody's focusing our life outside of ourselves. And for people like that, this concept of the tangible presence of God in here is a little bit mysterious. And I understand that not everyone's going to get it, but it's actually a beautiful mystery. To me, it is the most beautiful thing about what we would call the Christian life. So I want to tell you two ways this has changed my life this morning. The first is this. And it's just knowing that I've not been alone and that I'm not alone in the toughest moments of my life. Anybody here had any tough moments? Raise your hand if you've ever had a tough moment in life, like a pretty tough moment. Look around. Yeah, it seems to pretty much be the universal human experience, isn't it, right? So the question is, when you have those tough moments, is the deepest sense in your life that you're completely alone and on your own? Or is the deepest sense, even though you may be struggling, that you aren't really alone anymore? For me, those toughest moments of my life have been things like, especially in our younger years, the dozens of times that I was broke and didn't know how I was going to feed and house our young family. Or the times that I was working on 3 jobs. I spent 25 years sleeping 4 hours a night, for real. Because that's the level of work I needed to do to feed my family. And there were times I just had to say, Lord, I would go home, take a nap, and go back to another job, and I would just say, Lord, I need you to get me through this. I need you to sustain me. Of course, I always wanted to believe it was till like next month. Lord, I need you to get me through the next 20 years of this. Or I think of the times that Linda and I were sitting in Central DuPage Hospital, Loyola, Edward Hospital, Children's Memorial with our little boy. First when he was an infant, and then when he was 6 years old, having surgery after surgery after surgery. That little boy was here, by the way, last week. You might have noticed him around church. He's 41 now. Much to his chagrin and mine. Or I think of the times that I've lost friendships that I thought would be lifelong and the pain of that. Or the times that leading this church has been stressful and daunting. and I have been trying to find my way. And there have been a few of those. Or the times that I've struggled with feelings about whatever in life that I was failing. I don't know if you've ever struggled with that. And all those things suck. They do. But it's different to experience those things with the sense that you're alone, and to experience them with the thought that God is present in your life, and He has promised to you that whatever is happening at this moment, He's going to get you from here to another place. The other way this has changed my life, this presence of God, this presence of the Spirit in my life, is something the early Christians knew, but many of us today seem to have forgotten, and that's this, that when Jesus comes to live in you by His Spirit, He brings with Him everything that He is. This is why, by the way, it's very important that when you talk about knowing God or having God in your life or having the Spirit of God in you, that you connect that to the Jesus of the Gospels. Because the Spirit that lives in you, the Spirit of God that lives in you, Paul calls it the Spirit of Jesus. So this is a Holy Spirit whose thoughts, whose heart, whose ways are directly parallel to those of the Jesus who walked among human beings in the Gospels. And that's very important because people have all kinds of ideas about God. So when I say the Spirit of God lives in me, what I'm saying is the Spirit of Jesus, who is like Jesus, like we read of Jesus being, that's the kind of person, the kind of being who has come to dwell inside me. And having come to live in me, He has brought with Him everything that He is. This is why Paul says in Colossians, he uses this phrase, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And what he really means is, Christ in you, the hope of your restoration to glory, or we might say to gloriousness. That Christ is in you so that you can become everything that God dreamed you to be. So, when we think of Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels, we see that Jesus is a whole and good and complete human being. This is why Paul calls Him the new man, or the new human being, or the last Adam, right? And so when He comes to dwell in you, He's coming to dwell in you as that whole and complete, and we're in the mystery of the incarnation here, human being, that divine human being, who comes to live in you. And so that means that everything that He is now dwelling inside of you. So you might say, well, Pastor Fran, but I'm kind of a mess as a human being. That's okay, because you now have the new human being living inside of you, and He's going to make you into what He is. You see that? It's like a seed, right? You put that seed in the ground. When that seed grows, it reproduces after its own kind. This beautiful Jesus now lives in you so that He can produce in you, He can replicate in you all the things that He is. Are you afraid? I am sometimes. Well, He's not. And He's going to work on that in you. Are you selfish? Well, He's not, and His desires are going to become your desires. Do you struggle to see things? Jesus talks about our blindness, Do you struggle to kind of see things the way they are, to see yourself in right perspective, all those kind of things? Well, that's okay, because here's the deal. His vision is 20/20. Have you closed off your heart? Well, His heart is open and it's beating inside you. Do you feel like you're not worth very much? I've felt that way many times in my life. But here's what I learned. The one who actually knows what I am is now inside my very being. And He's going to tell me, and He has been telling me 1,000 times a day, that I am the beloved of God, until I finally started to believe it. That's Christ in you. The hope of your restoration to what you were made to be. The writer of the New Testament letter of Hebrews describes this in one place. He describes us in one place as, and I love this phrase, those who have tasted of the powers of the age to come. Paul calls Jesus the new human being, and the new human being now dwells in you. What's kind of hard to put into words for you, but many of you know what I'm talking about, is that since God took up residence in me by His Spirit all those years ago, He's been speaking and doing all these things that I've been describing in my inner person. I'm tasting now. I'm experiencing now the foretaste of what's coming. I'm becoming in the present a little more of that new human being that I will one day be fully. Paul says in Romans 8 that the Holy Spirit and the Spirit's life in us is, listen to this phrase, a deposit guaranteeing what is to come. Like a down payment. Like what's happening in you now is the earnest that God has put in you. It's the thing it's what He's given you and the thing He's doing in you and His presence to you that makes you know that what you are experiencing in this seed form now, these changes of heart, the things you see that you didn't used to see, these changes in your desires, the way that God helps you to push back on your fears, your increased way of seeing other people and loving other people, all these things that you're beginning to experience now are the down payment that guarantees to you that someday you're going to be all that. And the understanding that more of this is coming, that God's going to wipe away the tears from our eyes, as Revelation says, that our fears are going to flee to the hills, that my selfishness is going to become a thing of the past. I'm never selfish anymore, am I, honey? That all my broken relationships, this is a big one for me, that all my broken relationships are going to be restored. That as Samwise said, that everything sad is going to come untrue, that love is going to rule and joy is going to become the constant. You know what that is, all that? It's a little thing called hope. And I have it now because I've tasted what's coming. This is the journey of a real Jesus living in us and making us new. So accept no substitutes. And there are substitutes, right? So, for example, you could go off and you could chase a faith that's all about, God gave us this book, and we just gotta dissect this book with exactitude and make sure that even on this one page, the 133 things it says that I better be doing, I better be doing, and then I better go to my small group, right, Diane, so they can hold me accountable for all that and tell me how I'm failing as a Christian. Because I got to be keeping this word. I got to be keeping these commandments. You go chase that if you want. Those are some of the meanest and most judgmental and most joyless Christians I know. And I say that as a guy who loves this book more than I've ever loved it in my life. But you could chase that kind of faith if you want. Or you could go chase, there's this whole thought out there for a lot of, when you start talking about the Holy Spirit, you get around some Christians, you start talking about the Holy Spirit, and they're going to go, oh yeah, the Holy Spirit. Because there's this whole thing with a lot of Christians that, that what the Spirit's work is you having, like I described, a really tangible, kind of powerful God experience, right? You're supposed to have those every 5 minutes. And if you're not having them, something's wrong. And then you become, I used to say the church Lynn and I used to go to, I guess I can say this because that church doesn't exist anymore. People were like drug addicts, like what's the Holy Spirit saying next? What's He doing? We got to get a fix. We got to, And so if somebody wasn't prophesying every 5 minutes, or you weren't hearing God, or somebody wasn't speaking in tongues, or you came to church and people weren't flip-flopping around on the floor, something was wrong. I know, some of you are like, what are you talking about? And others of you are like, I think I went to that church, right? So, but you know what? You know what that leads to? That way of looking at the Holy Spirit that's all about this next big thing you're going to experience leads to really shallow Christianity, because what you're not thinking about is any of the deeper magic. You're not thinking about becoming that new person. You're not thinking about that. Or you can go all Christian political A-team to storm the Capitol and take back America for your angry sword-wielding deity, who doesn't, by the way, look very much like Jesus. You can do that, but those are some of the most fearful Christians I know, because they think their strength is in the weapons of this world, whether political or otherwise. They think that's where the strength is, and so they're fervently trying to get their hands on it, whatever. It reminds me of a verse in Jeremiah. I love this verse. Jeremiah says, some trust in horses and some trust in chariots, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Right? Not trusting in horses and chariots and, whatever. So you can chase a substitute, or you can take the journey where you cultivate the awareness of the presence of the Spirit of God actually dwelling in your inner person. Now, if that's a new thought for you, you might be like, but it might need to be a new thought for you. You might be like, that sounds mysterious. It is. But if you take that journey, what's going to happen is that the good and beautiful God is going to come and bring the life of the Spirit into you. And He's going to take you places that you've wanted to go and didn't know how to get there. Here's what I know. I'm standing here before you this morning as a man who is not alone, as a man who has a song in his heart after all the ups and downs of life, as a man with a vision of life that's bigger than survival. There's more to this than just surviving. Don't get me wrong, I want to survive, but it's bigger. As a man with a love for people that keeps growing, and with the dream of a day when all of us and all the earth are going to look on the face of God. And when we do, I suspect that the first thing we're going to do is be speechless. The second thing we're going to do is to let it sink in. And I think the third thing we're going to do is we're going to dance. All this that I've been talking about this morning, the life of God in me, in you, in us, doing His thing, looks like Jesus, sounds like Jesus. This maybe is the biggest reason I'm still a Christian.